Hello, I'm Steph from My Driver Classic, and today I'm showing you a French classic. I'm showing you the Citroen GS. You might be already familiar with the Citroen GSA because Ian from Hubnut of course owned Giselle, but we're taking a further step back in time and we're looking at the GS, which preceded the GSA. Now this particular car is owned by a lovely man who is a die-hard Citroen fan, and he imported it from France, and it's an astonishingly lovely example, and I'm quite excited to show you it today. So if you've never watched one of these videos before, we're going to have a look around the car, we're going to have a look under the bonnet, in the back, we'll walk through the dash together, and we're even going to go out for a drive to test that suspension to see what it's really like. So buckle up, we're going to go and discover the Citroen GS. Introduced in 1970, the Citroen GS was devised by Citroen to help fill a gap in their range. They had, of course, the 2CV and the AMI leading the way in their economy sector, and the luxurious DS led the charge at the upper end of Citroen's showroom. But for the middle buyer, the choice was weak, and in fact pretty much non-existent, so Citroen decided the GS would sit firmly in the middle. Citroen got it right in so many ways, as you'll see in this video, but crucially it clicked with the buyers and the reviewers. It won Car of the Year in 1971 and sold over 1.8 million units worldwide, which is really good going. And it is a brilliant result, but then they did spend 14 years taking the car from concept to launch. So with all that input and thought, well, you'd hope they kind of got it spot on. And if you're wondering about success and market penetration, my goodness, these GSs were seen across the world. They were assembled and sold everywhere from Chile to Thailand through to what was then known as Yugoslavia and South Africa. It really was everywhere. Now, the car was designed by a trusty pair of hands, which was, apologies if I get the pronunciation wrong, but it was Robert Opron, who was the man that had restyled the DS in 1967. Now, if you know anything about DSs, you'll know that that restyling then gave it the shark nose and the lights, which turned with the steering. And he was also one of the clever minds behind the SM, the CX, and later on, the Renault 25. But we talk about Citroen and Renault coming together later on. So the initial launch of this car had the 1015cc engine, which is what we've got today on test. So it feels quite natural really, we're stepping into the first iteration. Now you're going to see that today it cruises beautifully, and realistically on the roads we test it on, it wants for nothing. But buyers of the era felt that, well, it was just a bit underpowered and they wanted more. And by the end of the production of the GS, the car was then sporting a 1299cc engine, which was an incredibly smooth flat 4 engine. And by the way, they didn't waste the 1015cc, it went into other things, which I think includes the AMI. Now it's worth noting that on tests on the 1015cc, as we've got it in here, the car had 55.5 brake horsepower, and due to the impeccable aerodynamics of the car, it could and would, crucially, achieve 90 plus, being told it's in the low 90s miles per hour, which is still more than enough for the busy 21st century roads that we'll travel on today. The transmission chosen for the GS was a standard 4-speed manual, but there was also the option to go for the C-Matic, which as I understand it, and it's been explained to me, is essentially a clutchless manual. I think it's a bit of an automatic setup. Now, I believe that the 5-speed box, which comes later on, is only introduced with the arrival of the GSA. I haven't seen it on any of the GSs. The suspension was hydropneumatic, and I'm going to show you on later how that works, and also a little bit about it as well, because it's such a clever design. Now you might be thinking, with such cracking sales, market expansion and a worldwide interest in the brand, that Citroen were flying high and they were doing really well. But here's the thing. It didn't quite go like that throughout the 70s, because Citroen were hideously impacted by their desire to create a Wankel Rotary engine, which was a collaboration with NSU, if you remember those guys, and they called it the Citroen Birotor, and it failed for a number of reasons, including costs. And if you're wondering where the cost sat for a Citroen Birotor, it made it 70% more expensive than a normal Citroen GS. And what does that mean it costs in terms of the range? Well, it made it just as expensive as a DS, which then totally screws up where it sits in the range, and it'll probably surprise you, or won't, that less than 1,000 of these were sold. And it was with that level of failure and that loss of investment that then led to Peugeot's takeover of Citroen in the mid-1970s. However, as we all know, it's not all lost because Citroen lived on and so did the GS, and it was replaced in 1980 by the GSA, which of course is a favourite amongst many Citroen fanatics, called Citroenatics, and viewers of Hubnut. Now come on, let's jump in and have a better look at this dash because this is art. When Ian from Hubnut brought Giselle the GSA to the NEC, I popped inside and I thought, blimey, this layout is really nice, and I loved that futuristic dash. And I thought, what could top that? And now today I've got in a GS, and I've never been in a GS until today, and I've seen this dash layout and I love it. And you know what I really like is that, and it's such a hard thing to get right, is the mix of curves and straight lines. It's a really bold design statement, and I think sometimes we look at cars, and especially modern stuff, and they're all just, you know, a mix of the same sea of curves, and we talk about aerodynamics, but changing things. And what I'm saying is most cars today don't stand out and leave you with a defining memory. This dash, I've never seen anything like it, and I don't know if I'll ever see anything like it again. I love that, and Citroen used to get that so right, where they would design things that didn't just feel like cars, they felt like works of art. And it's functional as well, it's not just design for design's sake. So looking through the dash, and I'm going to walk you through what we've got, it's all quite simple. So up here you've got your amp meter, you've got your fuel gauge, and in the centre here you've got your, it's called the Cyclops, or the Cyclops Speedo. And now this, it's really important to point out, was not used on British variants of this particular car. This is a French car, and so you still get that Cyclops on it. When you look at the British ones, they're a little bit more sensible, but I think it's to the detriment of the vehicle. And coming down from there, you've got your warning lights, you've got your mileometer, you've got your trip clock, and you've got a very small clock. Now I know this is a very small criticism, but I'm just going to say it. That clock could do with being slightly bigger because it does look very small, and there's plenty of space in there that you could bulk that out a little bit. Coming down from there, you've got these three controls here. Now, the heating system on this, in terms of turning on the heating or the cool air, is a little bit convoluted. So you have to either select the fan or the cold air fan. So the cold air fan seems to have 2 clicks, and Ragnar was showing me it. So Ragnar's the owner, and this feels a little bit too, I'm not going to touch it, but he felt very confident clicking through it. I do not. And so you do all of that. You've got the controls over here that correlate with it, so you pull it up and down to get that airflow coming through as well. And then just down here, this is your directional. So essentially over here to your left is the windscreen, and he said if you pull it right, that takes it over to cabin. So it seems like quite a lot to be meddling with just to get the heating on and start controlling all of it. I would have liked it all in one place, but I really like the layout of the dash, so I don't think I could complain too much. Coming down from there, most things are as what they seem. Now there is one thing, we've talked about this in Citroen videos before, and it's a detail that I like so much that it helped me decide that I was going to keep my Proton, and it's this single spoke steering wheel. Now when you look at it, it might look for some slightly strange. However, what it means is when you are motoring round and you're moving the steering wheel round, when you've got 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 spoke wheels, your view of this area here is impeded every time that's going round. Whereas with your single spoke, most of the time, the vast majority, everything here is completely visible, and that makes for a more confident driving experience. Now they copied that, Mitsubishi copied that, and then Proton, when they bought the Mitsubishi design, then kept that single spoke steering wheel in, and it's one of the things I really like about my car, so it wins points here today as well. So you've just got some basic controls here, you've got the windscreen wipers, you've got the indicators, And then you've got the lights over here as well, just on a turn. We saw that on another one of the Citroens, and for the life of me, I can't remember which. I think it might have been the Ami where it was on the turn as well. Coming down from there, you've got your choke just hidden away. Now, this is one of the things I do really like about Citroen, and I'm sure some of you, would we say Citroenatics, Citroenites out there would agree with me, is that when Citroen design a car and they think about the stuff that you aren't using too regularly, they do tuck it away, and that just makes for a more streamlined approach, and it's a kind of cool concept, really. Over here is just a little dial to adjust the backlight behind the Cyclops Speedo. Coming down into hazard warning lights. We love hazard warning lights, so handy, especially when these old cars go wrong. And then this, that looks like the top of a spade. And I saw it at first, I thought, what is, but yes, because I did a bit of reading, and it is, of course, the handbrake. So to release that, you pull it in, and you just push that back into the dash, and it sits really neatly, because at first I thought it was some sort of ashtray or cup holder. Coming down from there, we've got the aforementioned heater controls, and then over on the right here we have got the glove box, which has got lots of bits and pieces in, because of course the owner is on holiday and he's brought the vehicle with him to the Citroen Car Club Rally. Now, looking around, that is pretty much everything we've got, and I think it's going to make for a really pleasurable driving experience, because of course we've got all the hydropneumatic suspension that I was talking about, we've got the various other bits and pieces, and really I want to see what won this car of the year over the SM, because the SM is such an impressive car that this must have a lot on offer. Now, you've also probably noticed that the bonnet is up. Well, I'm going to tell you why. Ragnar's been getting Pete and Barry, we've seen them in other videos, to have a bit of a fiddle with the carburettor. So what we're going to do is we're going to start it up, and just remember it's that 1015cc engine under the bonnet in this. I can't remember when they changed it. I think it was mid-late 70s that changed over, and a lot of people think the 1015 is underpowered, which is why they started increasing the engine size. But we'll see how it performs for us today. But first of all, let's see if we can get the car started, because they've been meddling with the carb. Might just need to give it a bit of a pedal. By the way, these seats are really comfortable and beautifully upholstered. They're almost like, you know, I always say they're like grandad trousers, where they're that lovely thick cord, like a lovely thick soft cord, and the seats are, again, tailored to your back. So when you're sitting back, they support your back in all the right places. They are so comfortable. This is a very comfortable car in general. There's a lot of space around you. There's a lot of light coming in. Visibility is good. All the ingredients are there for a fab test drive. So we're going to see if we can get her started. Fingers crossed, because she did just start a minute ago, but she's, yeah, we'll have a look. Come on. Just keeping my foot on the accelerator there. I'm worried that she might cut out. It's very quiet, isn't it? Quieter than I expected. No, I like that. Have a listen from the outside, and then we're going to pinch her off this rally field and go and do a test drive. The GS has the same self-levelling hydropneumatic suspension system as the DS, the SM, the BX and others. Now, to put it plainly, you're gliding across the landscape on a bed of compressed nitrogen. If you were to dig deep and take a closer look, there's a little green sphere above each wheel which acts as a damper and spring combined. And if you're wondering if it's costly for the rocky roads out there, it's actually cheaper and easier to replace than conventional springs. Or so many of the owners have told me anyway. It's also worth mentioning that the suspension is very compact and it's laid flat along the floor, which means there's no need for rear suspension turrets and allows for a completely flat and square load space. But it's not just about ride comfort, because it's also about ride composure, and on a poorly surfaced road, the GS is safer and more settled than a car with steeled springs. The anti-dive disc brakes are also fully powered hydraulics, and you'll see those when we go out. And it's worth mentioning as well that they're not power assisted like most cars. It's fully powered and pressurized by the same system as the suspension, which then makes the brakes very sensitive on your first drive. But as you'll see when we get out there, you very quickly get used to the sharpness and discover just how effective they really are. Right, let's go on an adventure. Oh, that suspension coming straight into play. Gearbox is quite notchy, but it's quite easy to change through. I do think because I'm so used to changing gear, because I usually drive a right-hand drive car with my left hand, changing it with the right, it's probably a little bit more laboured than it should be because I'm just not used to that motion with my right hand. But it's something you could easily get yourself into. Now, as I cruise along here, the roads of Great Britain come into full force once more. And what do I mean by that? I mean that these roads are incredibly uneven, potholed, full of dips, and really all over the place, and do need a jolly good bit of TLC, as do most of the roads in Great Britain, which usually means that on a test we hear doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo as we're driving along. But today, with that suspension that I demoed for you just before we headed out on our test drive, you can see here that everything is being taken in its stride, which really does help to add to the quiet and the ambience inside the vehicle. Because if you remember, when we took out that AMI, it was so loud, and that 2CV, and for me that was a bit of a drawback, and it made me not really fall in love with those cars the way that I was hoping to. Whereas I come inside this GS, and already, as you can probably see here, the steering is so light and responsive. It's quiet inside the cabin in a way that I would expect from even maybe a late 80s, early 90s car. And I wouldn't expect from a 70s car. Usually with 70s cars, it's full of creaks, squeaks, wind noise coming in left, right and centre. Inside here, not so. The only wind noise I can hear coming in is this window that I've got open, because unseasonably for 2024, it's actually quite warm today. And as I cruise along these roads, barely turning the steering wheel to keep the car going in the direction I want, absorbing every pothole that rises in front of me, this is one of the most sedate, almost I would say luxurious driving experiences that I've really ever had in a Citroen, and it all feels rather modern, and I'm quite enjoying it because it's modern with a difference. It's modern, but it's not boring, and you get all those modern takes that you might get from an 80s or a 90s vehicle in terms of it being, you know, light on the steering, responsive, quick, not loud inside, not bone shudderingly throwing you all over the road, and yet you get that delicious styling from the 70s with a bit of pizzazz to it. It's all the ingredients for just a cracking driving experience. Now, I will say something, if you've ever seen one of these, you'll probably notice that it looks, when you get inside here, like the pedals are massively offset. And I looked at that myself when I got in, and I thought, I don't know if I'm going to like that, or it's going to feel slightly odd. And it doesn't feel odd at all. It's kind of strange really, because these seats are so wide, you just kind of fill that space and your feet naturally move over into this position over here, and it just doesn't feel odd in the same way that I thought it would. It's a bit of an observation if you are looking at one of these on a rally field and thinking, wonder if that would feel slightly odd. Now, the other thing I should probably mention is there are discs on all four wheels on this in terms of your brakes, which means that if we are going to brake, we're having to be very gentle on those brakes, to the point where I'm barely touching them to bring the car to a stop. And that, again, is such an attractive thing to have on a car when you're faced with drivers of today, because everybody else is used to having these brakes that will stop as soon as you click your fingers. And so to have something that's comparable or almost as good as means that I feel a lot safer than I do with some of the other cars where we might just be on drums all round. Now, what are the other lovely things about this car? Well, as I cruise along, it's deliciously smooth, wonderfully quiet, yet I can still hear the hum of the engine, but it doesn't disrupt my thought process. and you've also got these beautifully slim pillars, and this means that you've got great visibility all round. I can't see quite to the end of the bonnet, but it hasn't impeded the confidence I feel whilst driving, because these mirrors are big enough to see everything. Everything is well positioned, and as well as that, all the controls are easily reachable. So there was a manufacturer recently, and I can't remember who we tested, and they said, you know, everything's within a fingertips reach. And I got in and it wasn't, and I thought, well, you've said that in the brochure and it's not at all. Whereas coming into this, they are all within a fingertips reach. Everything that I need on the regular, I can reach with relative ease. I'm just going to have to... Now, I did say there were no squeaks. The only squeak is actually coming from the clutch pedal. But look, what a small complaint to have about such a lovely little vehicle. Probably hear that notchiness on the gearbox as well. But again, it's probably just me that's not used to changing the gear in this. And as I cruise along, I'm just really enjoying it. From the way that these seats hug my body and put me at ease. I would like an armrest. I guess that would be one of my other things that... Oh goodness, let's not kill a pigeon. I would like an armrest because I think that would be nice for a long journey. But other than that, the car really does tick all the boxes as one of those cars that you could take on a really long journey and not feel really stressed out by the time that you get back. It's just a really sweet, calm, pleasurable driving experience, and I can totally see why Ian loved Giselle so much, because of course the GSA is a spin-off from the GS, and so therefore I imagine that it has those same qualities of making you feel at ease, comfortable, laid back, and just really brings the joy back into motoring, because I don't think you get that so much with modern vehicles anymore. A lot of them just appear as simply a means to getting A to B. This almost feels like a really lovely mix of an artistic creation and a great piece of motoring history that gets you around and you have good fun doing it. Would I drive one of these regularly? Absolutely, if I knew what I was doing under the bonnet. And to be honest, I was looking at them fiddling around earlier and it didn't actually look too stressful. So if you are watching this video and you're thinking, do I want a GS? Is it the car for me? If you've already decided that it is the car that you want, let me finish off the video with this. If you were to buy one of these and you had never had one before and needed a bit of help, it's got fantastic club support. We're pulling it back in today into the Citroen Car Club Rally. They are lovely people. It's a brilliant community, and to be honest, it's one that I would be happy to be a part of myself. Now that's it from me today as I pull back into this rally field. I hope you've enjoyed sharing the GS with me, but until next time, take care and drive safely.